Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So nice to be here, and it's a real privilege and to learn together. And I do want to make this as interactive as possible, so feel free to raise your hand. Since they are taping it, we need to get a mic to you. But just feel free to make this as casual as possible. Just a quick question, was anybody at this session last year? Oh, good, so I can tell the same stories and won't bore anyone. All right, so we're going to start with a little exercise. So I want you to pair off into twos. And if you can't find a two, you can do it in three, although it's going to be more effective in twos. And we're going to do a little role play where one of you will be the philanthropist and one of you will be the asker. And you can sort of make it, the rules of the game can be your own. You can have known each other for a long time. You could have just met. You could, whatever sort of scenario you want to play. And I want you to ask each other for, let's just say, 10,000 pounds for whatever cause you want. And then after 5 minutes, we're going to switch places. And the other one's going to be the philanthropist, and the other one will be the asker. Okay? So we're going to start now. So pair off into twos. One's philanthropist, one's donor. And then we're going to switch. I'll give you a 5-minute warning and we'll switch. All right, well, that was a great way to get the energy flowing. I am just holding this mic for a second so I can hand it to some people. So I just want to get some observations from both sides of the equation. What some feelings were coming up, what was working, what wasn't, what were potentially some barriers or fears. So volunteers, who wants to start? Right here.
It's caught me eating. So I think the challenge for me, I'm reasonably confident in I think, I don't know, we'll get some feedback from her, but the challenge is, do you do the direct ask or not? And how do you judge whether you actually go in for the kill and say, right, what I want is 10,000, or whether it's a slowly relationship building. And the US way is so I've been told, is very direct. Mm-hmm. And I think the UK, there's a little bit more courting. There's a bit longer courting phase. So how do you make that judgment?
I wonder. We're going to talk about that. Now let me ask you. So when you were playing the role of asker, what were you feeling? And what was the scenario? Had you known each other for a long time? No, you just met.
Yeah.
So this was a first meeting. Interesting. Okay. So how were you feeling about the asking? Were you feeling?
Yeah, like I said, that was my tension. Do I go in for the kill, or do I?
The kill.
Do I?
By the end of the session, if you say the kill,
okay, all right,
we're having problems.
All right, bye.
Okay, and then when you were the philanthropist, how were you feeling in that scenario?
Well, empowered, obviously.
Power, yeah. You felt some power.
But wanted to get to the point.
Right.
Wanted to how could I help and how could I support?
How can I help? Okay.
You know.
Do you want to share?
Yes. I'm Janet Wasserstein from MIT, and in the United States, we actually don't ask for money straight away. Absolutely not. What we do is build a relationship. So I would go and visit a foundation, and I would actually never mention money. I would actually talk about what their role is, what they do, and to see if there's any way that we can engage. So it's a long, slow process that I've found.
Interesting. All right. So some of these notions I'm going to challenge you all on, but who else? Anybody else want to share?
Maybe I should stop eating.
That's a good technique when you're asking, by the way. Just have a mouthful of food.
I don't think I need this. Can you? I have a loud voice.
They want you to because they're taping it.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Well, I think it's also about what are they going to get out of it. Even for a philanthropist, even for a corporate, you have to make sure you understand where they're coming from and what they want out of the exchange. So, not just thinking that you only talk about how wonderful they'll be and how many things they'll help or save, but what's the benefit to them or their organization.
And so were there
company.
differences for you when you were in each scenario? And
yeah, she was tough.
As you were tough as an asker?
And no, she was on both sides. And he needed to talk to his wife, So
Right.
there's other players that were not in the room.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, true. We're going to come back to some of these issues. And what were your observations?
I think that, well, there was a lot of resistance coming. There was a lot of excuses where the money, perhaps the charitable money, was going and how good the benefit was. Resistance in relation to why would I want to do this, and what would be in it for me, and what would be my return on the investment, and how would I get that return, and how long would it take? Because obviously the amount of time is critical. If they want quick feedback, or they're not willing to wait 5 years until your project is up to scale, then there's those kind of issues.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything else? Any other observations that were maybe potentially a little different? We'll just talk to a few more people since we have a short time.
I think with
today.
both of us, so I'm working to end female genital cutting, and Greg is working on a say what you do quickly.
And the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
End Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So both of us got, I think,
Quickly.
so involved, right, in both. I mean, I think we both pitched quite well on a vision, but by the time we got to sort of explaining what we do and how, it's a complex picture. So then it was, how do we get to the complexity and really bring across what we're trying to do, and then get the ask in as well. So the ask, I think, was pretty simple for both of us, but it was more that how do you get the richness of talking through what you're doing?
In 5 minutes. Yeah, which is also a challenge. All right, we had one more comment, and then we'll go ahead. Maybe you can hold your comment for.
So neither of us got to the ask, actually, but for completely different reasons.
Right.
In that I was spending the whole time trying to understand what she was interested in as a philanthropist and what sort of motivated her choices. She spent the whole time telling me about her project when she was raising money, which was very interesting, but we were sort of approaching it from the opposite sides.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for when we could spend a whole session on this concept and the different ways that we approach this. But let me just share with you today a little bit about how I personally approach fundraising and have, in my opinion and experience, had some success. I've run several billion-dollar capital campaigns. I just recently completed a project where we raised $150 million in 9 months. And so I'll share some tools and techniques, but also just some general philosophy about how to frame the whole practice of fundraising in a way that might shift a little bit, hopefully, the way that you're thinking about it. My big theory of change, and the colleagues I work with, our big theory of change is that there are ample resources on this planet to get all the good work done we want to get done. And when I say resources, I never, ever, ever just mean money. I mean people's time and creativity and their networks and their life experiences and all of these things. There are so many resources, but they stay inactive because of the barriers we put up. I do a lot of board training, and the first thing I do almost exclusively is I'll go in and I'll say to boards, roomfuls of very potentially engaged people, and I'll say there are so many resources in this room that aren't in action. And I can see the board members looking around saying, that is true. There's so, I'm giving you my most valuable resource, right, which is my time. But there's so much more I could be doing. And then I talk to executive directors and CEOs, and one of the most common things I hear is, I'm very frustrated with my board. They're not doing enough. I want them to do more. How do we take them deeper? And so that is what I really want to talk about today. What are the obstacles we put up that block these abundant flow of resources? So I'll just start by telling you my own story. So I started as a fundraiser, as she mentioned, 26 years ago. I used to give talks and say, I know what you're thinking. I started when I was 14. But nobody laughs anymore. Everybody's like, she does look like she's been doing it for 26 years. So I kind of stopped telling that. But anyway, I was really fortunate because I started for my liberal arts alma mater. It was a tiny little college in Pennsylvania called Allegheny College. And I was very fortunate. I had a college president who had been a very senior fundraiser at a well-known institution. And so he pulled me into his office almost on day one. I was literally 21 years old, maybe a week out of college. He pulled me into his office and he said, you cannot raise money sitting behind a desk. He said this sitting behind his desk, I might add, to me. And he said, all I want you to do is go out this year and make 350 face-to-face visits. I mean, imagine how many visits that is. That's a lot. That's like a visit a day. We're raising money for a science building. Here's the blueprints. Go. Oh, and by the way, girl from Pittsburgh who had been on a plane exactly once to Disney World with my family, you're covering New York City. And so I diligently, just went into the field, and I started calling on alumni, and I was talking with parents and friends of the college, and I would sit down in their office, and I would pitch them on the importance of the science building, and I'd pull out the blueprint, and I'd say, your name goes here. Nothing. I was getting absolutely nothing. I couldn't even get a second visit with people. Very cordial. They were alums and they were close to the college, but they were absolutely not responding. And I remember this moment, and this moment is emblazoned in my brain until my dying breath. About halfway through the year, I was walking up Fifth Avenue. And by the way, it was 88, so I had the big shoulder pads and the spiral berm. And I was carrying my graduation present, which was one of those hard Coach briefcases that we all carried back in the late 80s. And I walked up to my nonprofit-sized hotel room, and I remember sitting on the bed saying, I have got to get a new job. Fundraising stinks. It's the worst profession. I was actually an embarrassment to my parents, I think, when they would say, what does your college graduate do? She's a fundraiser. And so I just was thinking, I'm a philosophy major and I'm a literature major. What could I do? What could I do? Then I remember having a moment, and it really was truly an epiphany, this moment where I was sitting there thinking, but something is not adding up for me. Because I know for a fact that the people with whom I'm working and calling on at the time, not even working with yet, calling on cared about science and the leaders of tomorrow and innovation, and they cared about the kind of work that was happening at the college. And I cared about those things too. What was the disconnect? There was some disconnect that was happening. And the disconnect that was happening is that I was putting money at the center of the relationship. And as soon as you put money at the center of any relationship, I would say with philanthropist, person who's asking, I would say with employer-employee, with spouses and partners often. Anytime you're putting money at the center of the relationship, the person who has the money ostensibly has the power, and the person who is looking for the money is in a position of potential weakness or a supplicant. And so from that moment forward, I refused to put money at the center of relationships. I keep work, whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm raising money for, I keep the work itself at the center of the relationship. And it's a very different dynamic when you're talking about the work and you're not talking about the money, because the money then becomes just the gas that goes in the car. It's not the car, it's not the driver, it's not the destination. It is the fuel that makes the car go where we want it to go. It's an important fuel. Because, by the way, an idea just stays an idea unless it gets resourced. And so we need to resource it. But we've got to put money in its proper perspective, which we very often don't. I will talk to nonprofits often, and I'll say, what's your goal? And they'll say $50 million. And I'm like, that's not your goal. Your goal is to end female genocide cutting. And this is what it's going to take from a resource perspective to get to the next phase. And so it's really incumbent upon us to start to understand where we put these barriers up. And money, I would say, is probably one of the biggest ones. And so I spend a lot of time in my class helping people unpack where they get stuck with money and really try to see that there is no difference between, and I'm not crazy about, I haven't figured out the phraseology for this yet, but there's really no difference between givers and getters. The givers are getting so much more in return. And getters, quote unquote, people who are looking for resources to do all the good work that they want to do, are giving so much of themselves and their time and their passion. And you as social entrepreneurs and philanthropists can identify with this. So how are we breaking down these walls? And a big piece of it is understanding our own relationship with money, both as philanthropists and as heads of nonprofits and as social entrepreneurs. it's interesting because I do a lot of work with CEOs of nonprofits, and they, as we're unpacking this, and my class is a whole year-long class, so it'll be hard to squeeze this into an hour, but we spend a lot of time working on some of our earliest experiences with money, where we have biases. A lot of people actually have hidden kind of biases against wealthy people. And they somehow believe, it might be subconscious, but believe somehow they've gotten it through ill-gotten gain or something. Even though a lot of the philanthropists I work with, many, many, many high net worths, took so much courage and grit and determination to get to the place they're getting. And so to me, what I think there are jerks at every level of the socioeconomic spectrum. I really do. And so our job is to let's figure out who the jerks are and not work with them. So let's talk about what other barriers, that we put up. I think another barrier is this belief in competition. Was anybody in the last session, the Giving Pledge session, where they were talking about, there was a philanthropist talking about sort of how he gets motivated. It was interesting. Do you know anybody have any guess of how many, in the United States alone, how many new nonprofits are created every month in the United States? Just take a wild guess. How many? 1,000. 3,000 new nonprofits are created every single month, every 30 days in the United States. India, I do a fair amount of work in India. I just did a workshop for the 12 Indian business school deans. Has over 2 million nonprofits, or the equivalent thereof. The UK has well in excess of 1 million charities. Africa now has 1 million charities. There is a lot of competition out there. And so for me, it cannot be about trying to go up against your fellow colleagues who are all doing good work in the world and try to make a pitch for why your organization is more important than someone else's. It just doesn't work. When I am calling on somebody, when I'm working with somebody, I fundamentally, believe I'm probably the 10th person in that person's office with a good idea. And actually, I don't ever meet in people's offices, which is a whole separate conversation. But the 10th person who's in conversation with this person this week with a good idea. Ideas fragment us. I was doing a lecture at the Nature Conservancy, and I kid you not, the oceans people and the trees people were fighting with each other over who had more important, who had a more important piece of the puzzle. And it's, the reality is we all know this, that everything we're doing is so deeply interconnected, that you cannot disaggregate clean water from girls' education, from sanitation, from infrastructure. I mean, it's so deeply integrated. And so if we're trying to make a case for why our idea is more important than somebody else's idea, it's going to be a challenge. And so I really believe that we need to remove that kind of sales dynamic from the center of our work and look for people who want to partner with us, who want to create a difference, who want to really have impact and meaning. And so I heard upstairs the word customer being used, that I treat our donors like customers, and I kind of bristled inside because I really think our partner, I don't even really like the word donors, our partners are not customers. They're partners. They're people who want to be with us together to make change. So I started an organization with Quincy Jones. I don't know if you all know Quincy Jones, the great music producer. We decided that music in schools in the US was really under threat. And so we decided to do a collaboration and bring 90 nonprofits together who are all working on bringing music to kids. And I remember us sitting around a big conference table saying, what should we call this? We knew we wanted to use Quincy's name. And we decided to call it the Quincy Jones Music Consortium, because the word consortium comes from the Latin word constare, which means to stand together. And that's a very different place from which to work than a client base or a customer base. The word client comes from the Latin word clientum, which means to lean against. And I very often think that the way that we're looking at our relationships with our partners is in a client relationship. Now, the challenge with the client relationship, we all know, or a customer relationship, is we're negotiating all the terms up front. And so we're saying, we're going in, we're asking you, here's our promise of what we're going to deliver, and then we're going to try to fulfill that promise. That's a very fragile place to be. And it's actually what leads, I think, to conversations where we're not transparent, where we're afraid to tell our partners, what might not be working, what might be working. I think it inhibits risk capital from being invested. I think there's a lot of challenges with creating a customer base or a client base versus creating a consortium of people who are saying, look, we're in this together and we're going to figure it out. We absolutely have to have strategy. We absolutely, the other thing they were saying upstairs, and I agree completely, we have to know not just why we're doing it and what we're doing it, but how we're doing it. Of course you have to have strategy and action. Of course. But if you're creating a group of people who are partners with you, there's a lot more room to iterate, to take risks, to adapt, to change as you're growing together. And you're taking the first step together, and then potentially the next one and the next one. And we all know that the people who, it's not just this process of filling the pipeline with new people, but a process of getting a group together and taking the group deeper and deeper into the work. So I really think that our challenge is just that. How do we create a group of partners who really want to work on an issue together? We equate it in the book with the jazz band. Because of Quincy, I happen to be a big jazz aficionado. And a jazz band's a great metaphor in general, I think, for life, because you're not marching, towards some. I have nothing against symphonies, so this is a metaphor. But you're not marching towards some sort of prescriptive outcome, where each person's in his or her prescribed role and playing a very specific instrument, which I think often happens in this space. It's an iterative process where each person is bringing resources. And by the way, I, as the fundraiser, am absolutely bringing as many resources to this work as everybody else. And I think what happens often with sort of the fundraising challenge, especially for the fundraisers themselves, is that they're seen as the staff members. There was a study that came out recently that said half of all fundraisers want to quit their jobs. I bet many of you who are CEOs or executive directors are looking for fundraisers or have a hard time keeping fundraisers. Is that true? I get a call a day from somebody saying, I'm looking for a great fundraiser. And it's not surprising that fundraisers want to quit their jobs, because fundraisers are seen as a very transactional part of the team very often, not a part of the community. And so I actually wrote a response that was published in Forbes magazine that was talking about the fact, and I think this isn't just true for fundraisers, but for all of us, that there are kind of 3 levels of work. There's jobs, which nobody in this room is really just doing a job. A job is where you're just making enough money to pay the bills, go home. You don't think about it at the end of the day. There's careers, and in fundraising especially, I think there's a lot of people who are sort of in it for the career, which is why the typical fundraiser, and I know the stats the same in the UK, I just did a lecture 2 days ago at for all the Oxford fundraisers, is 18 months. What we need to do is really create, for all of us, but for our fundraisers too, turn it from a career into a calling. And in a calling, you can really tolerate all the career and job aspects in a different way. You can tolerate the frustrations and the confusion that sometimes happens around having these conversations with people. And so I think it's really, really important that we're thinking about how each of us every day are getting up and thinking about this work, not as a career, but as a calling, which I know most of you do, but I really challenge you to have that same kind of conversation with your boards and with your team. So do you have a comment? Can we get a mic over here, maybe?
Sorry. I'm not sure if you want comments in
Absolutely.
Okay,
this
great.
is very iterative.
Hi, Andras Ramesh-Goldman. I'm the executive director of Justice Rapid Response. So we are the ones who are looking for support and partners. 3 separate things. Those who we would partner with, who would be able to give us support, are very often, one of the first things they say is, we're looking for measurable results. So they are upfront asking for a promise to be fulfilled before you even carry out the activity, before you even form the partnership. They're asking you to prove that you're going to be able to deliver on whatever you're promising. And it's, especially in our field, it's very hard. I think in everybody's field, it's very hard. Secondly, a lot of the funders that we have encountered, and I think it's not just a generalization, are extremely structured. They are like the string section in an orchestra. They follow a script. They force you to follow their script. They create the situation that that you describe of donor and donee as opposed to partners.
Yeah.
Even when you go into pitching a partnership, you actually end up in roles. And I totally agree with you that we don't call the person who works for us as a fundraiser. We call them a development officer.
Yeah.
And so their job is to work with everybody else in the office, but to develop partnerships. So that's how we see it.
That's great. Well, I think that's true. Now, the challenge with the first couple of comments you made, thank you, is that, again, you're trying to make a case for, why your organization is going to have better measurable results than other organizations. And as a beginning conversation, I think that's a very tough place to start. So I think we need to start by having conversations with people about not trying to sell somebody on why this particular cause is more important, we have more measurable results, but how can we potentially work together to really create change? So I worked with a philanthropist, a very well-known philanthropist, one of probably the best known in the United States. And he's fantastic. He was working with me on this big $150 million raise. He was great. He went to Davos. He would sit down with people in meetings and he'd say, let's talk about business. But let me tell you what I'm really passionate about. What I'm really passionate about is extreme poverty eradication. And he would set up meetings with people and we'd go in, we'd come back to New York or to London or wherever, and we'd sit down with meetings and people, and he would he'd start pitching. And he would say, this is why this really matters to me. How can you help me? Or similarly, the person on whom we were calling would say, how can I help you? Now, ostensibly, these were socioeconomic peers. By the way, I would argue that a peer is not necessarily a socioeconomic peer. I think a peer are two people or a group of people who are working on something together to create real tangible results. But what would happen is the same thing as with my little blueprints, is that he'd say, how could you help me? And they'd say, well, let me think about it. Or, as a transactional gift, I'd love to give you $10,000. And by the way, I'm working on the art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Could you give me $10,000? And it became this very transactional kind of conversation. So after a couple of meetings, we were debriefing. This philanthropist's name is John, and who's great and so passionate, but we were debriefing, and he said, why are we not getting better results on this? And I said, John, perhaps it's because you're using the word help. Because again, just like when you put money in the center of an equation, when you're putting yourself in the situation where you're looking for help instead of partnership, you're automatically, again, going to be a supplicant. And so I said, John, what if next time we go in, we talk about what we're doing, and you say, how can we work together? It's a very different conversation when you're saying, how can we work together, then can you help me? Because you get yourself out of the supplicant position and you start to have a real conversation about how might we actually do something together that's going to have real results. And truly, it shifted the conversation. It shifted it for him. So he no longer felt like he was like going in, on bended knee. And by the way, I always say this to people, never, ever, ever go into a conversation on bended knee, with your begging bowl, that sort of image. Go in standing up, saying, this is really important work we're doing in the world, and we're looking for people to join with us. And so if I had a little tip for you today, it's just strike that word help from your lexicon and start to really think about how can we work together. And in that way, I believe you also can't be rejected. And so when I start my fundraising courses, I usually have a big whiteboard if we had more time today, and I always start with and I put on one half of the board, what is fundraising? And everybody says raising money for really important work in the world, fulfilling people's dreams, engaging people in a vision for a better world. It's all really good stuff. And then on this side of the board, I say, why is it so hard? And it is always the same thing. Money, we don't like to talk about money, fear of rejection, competition, all of these kinds of things. And I believe that you absolutely can't be rejected in this work, that you cannot be rejected in this work. Because if I go in and I have a conversation with you about the work I'm doing, and you say to me, well, you know what, my passions, I'm working on HIV, we're looking for people to join with us, and you say, no, my passion is the oceans, I'm going to say, you know what, that's not a loss or a rejection of me, that's a victory for the world. By the way, here's 3 organizations that are doing amazing work in oceans. Go work with them. And I have rarely met a philanthropist or anybody who doesn't want to do something with their lives and with their resources. And so it's a matter of learning. Now, what I've seen is philanthropists go on this philanthropic journey. And I'm going to start this with a little exercise. So take out a piece of paper. It's going to take just 2 minutes. All right, so here's the brain experiment. We'll be very Einsteinian and do this brain experiment. All right, some of you may have done it already, but it's a good one. And I have done this experiment all over the world. All right, this is the scenario. Your planet is dying. You're going to be transported to a new planet. All of your basic needs are met. So food, water, shelter, all your basic needs are met. You can take 3 things with you. What are the 3 things you're going to take? Just take a few minutes and write down, what are the 3 things you're going to take to the new world with you?
Not people.
It's up to you. You can take whatever you want. 3 things, but all your basic needs are met.
Does the planet have Wi-Fi?
This is an experiment in assumptions, too. So just write down the 3 things, and you can interpret things however you'd like. You can interpret things however you like. Write down the 3 things that you want to take with you. What are the 3 things you're going to take with you?
I don't have a pen, but I would say
All right.
my family, chocolate, and phone.
Family, I'll repeat it. Family, chocolate, and a phone. What are you taking?
Family, piano, and a ball.
Family, piano, and a ball. Terry?
My music collection, my family, and my movie collection.
Nice.
My significant other, my cats, and a Swiss Army knife.
Nice. What else? Some others. Throw out some things. What are you taking?
Family.
Family?
Plants and flowers and things, and books as a window on all the things I care about.
What else? A few other people. Let me just hear from a few other people. What are you taking in the back row? Either one.
Water container.
Water container. What else? That's it? Your basic needs are met. Oh, okay. So that's just going to be the container in which your basic. Photo. And a good friend. Nice. Just give me 1 or 2 more. What are you going to take?
Maybe my glass.
Your glass?
Plus the families.
Yeah, the family and the Wi-Fi. I always have this fantasy that, like, on the new planet, I don't have to deal with my Samsung, which is, like, literally the bane of my existence. So I kind of hope telecommunications doesn't exist on the new planet. One or 2 others? My dog. Nice. And running shoes. Nice. I work with, I'm on the board of the Blue School, the Blue Men Group. Does anybody know the Blue Men Group? There's this very creative troupe of actors, sort of quirky. But one of them said, I'm taking the ocean because I cannot bear to be on a planet without an ocean. I love that. I love that. And then somebody else said, if all the basic needs are met, I'm taking everyone because then everybody will have their basic needs met, which I also really liked. I know. The point is this, and again, I have literally done this exercise in India, in China, in Africa, in Australia, in the UK, certainly in the United States, and the answers are identical. Identical, because we as human beings have 3 buckets of needs. We have safety and security needs, we have family, community, tribe needs, and we have growth and development and learning needs, which is why we take our music and our film and our running shoes and seeds and all of these things, because we want to grow and we want to continue to learn as human beings. Now, the challenge with most fundraising is that we focus very often on the tribe piece, on the community piece, which is important. We want the right community with us. Again, working together, standing together, being a consortium. But if it starts there, it often ends in a place where it becomes very much about, where does my name go on the building? Or where's my table at the gala? Or who else is on the letterhead? And so it can become very much about a community of people who aren't growing and learning together, but a community of people who are coming together in name only. Now, by the way, I believe like in naming. I think people should name things. There's the RHODES room and the this and the that. I think it's all great because people should be proud of what they're doing. But there's also the risk if it's just naming without then taking the philanthropist and your partner deeper, then it can often become, we often call it the Edifice Complex, where somebody's just putting their name on an edifice and not actually learning and growing as together. And so I think as we're thinking about our strategies for how to engage our tribes and our community, we need to also be thinking about how to really allow people to grow and to go deeper. And again, to iterate, adapt, change, become a real team together. Have you all heard about the flow state? And so I think what we're trying to do a lot of times in this space and what happens with real growth is that we can move into this flow state where people are, and you often see this metaphor in sports where you kind of lose a sense of time and everybody's operating in this seamless place. Well, the flow state is an outgrowth of really being very mindful of each member and each member's resources on their team and how you match challenge with skill. Now, what we often do is we'll give people a very high challenge, but they don't have the skills to carry it out. And that causes anxiety. That's my stepdaughter in math. She's 13 years old. She has really advanced math, and she does not have the skills to do it. And so, she has anxiety a lot of times. So of course we're training her. The flip side of that, and I see this a lot on boards, is that people have so many skills and resources, but we're not challenging them enough. Right? And so we under-challenge people, and then what happens? You get bored. And so it's this mix of how are we looking at each individual person, ourselves, other people in the community, even people potentially we're not meeting, and that we're working with virtually online and other ways that we can talk about some strategies that I have found really work in terms of how to engage people who we don't build one-on-one relationships with online. But it's how do we get people in this flow state where we can really match challenge, match skills and resources, and then continue to grow those. Because then we're in the learning and growth period, right? Then we're not just in this community period. And it's, again, a different dynamic where people get excited and then they want to be part of this team. Now let me just give you a few techniques that I have found before we'll turn to questions and answers. A few techniques that I have found have really worked in terms of building new relationships or deepening current relationships. So have any of you heard of this? We're trying to create a meme around it, my co-author and I, who's a great philanthropist, a guy called Jeff Walker. Has anybody heard of Jeffersonian Dinners? So Jeffersonian Dinners, and you can call it whatever you want. We happen to call it Jeffersonian Dinners because Jeff was longtime board chair at Monticello, and Thomas Jefferson would have these amazing dinners in Monticello where candlelight and all the heads of state from all over the world would come and they'd have these engaging conversations. Only Thomas Jefferson was very hard of hearing. And so he'd be making small talk over here, and then he'd be trying also simultaneously. We all imagine this, right? We're at dinner parties, and we can kind of hear somebody over here saying something interesting, but you can't quite hear it. And so he implemented this rule that there could only be whole table conversations, no more small talk. And if you think of the dinner parties you go to very often, if you're not having a whole table conversation, which is a rarity, honestly, I think you really have to set the container for this. If you're not having a whole table conversation and you're sitting next to someone, what are you talking about? What do you do for a living? How many kids do you have? Where do your kids go to school? You're making chit-chat. You're not having real serious conversation about the issue at hand. So we have introduced this model called Jeffersonian Dinners, and it's been so successful in terms of both getting new people involved and, again, deepening, and I'll give you some examples, deepening relationships, but also really generating very tangible results. Literally millions and millions of dollars have come out of these Jeffersonian dinners. So the premise is this. It's really about breaking down these boundaries and getting people in a place where they can share authentically who they are. Because by the way, when we were earlier talking about the what and the why and the how, I think even more important is the who. You know, even more important than what I'm doing is who am I doing it with? Who is my who? And so the Jeffersonian Dinner can really help you. It's easy, it's an easy ask. It's easy to ask somebody to host a dinner for you. You gather a group of 10 to 12 people, no more than 15. It's very hard to have a conversation, no fewer usually than 8 because it's hard to really create a sense of momentum and solidarity. And you send bios out in advance because people do want to know people's bios, but you don't spend time at the dinner using bios. You start by asking an opening question which evokes a story. Now there's a lot of conversation at this conference about storytelling. Terry did a great session last year on storytelling and how critical it is, and we all know this. But it's really important that we're sharing our stories because this is what humanizes us and breaks down all these barriers. So for example, for Teach for America, we did a Jeffersonian dinner, and the first question was, who was your favorite teacher and why? We did one recently for the International Refugee Commission. Nobody in that room, even except the founder, who I think is a Skoll fellow, maybe Sasha Chanoff. Nobody in that room had ever met even a refugee, let alone been a refugee, except Sasha. But the question we asked was, talk about a time when somebody entered the trajectory of your life and changed it. Now we've all had that, which is the mission of that organization, is to enter people's life and change the trajectory of it. And you could just feel, as people were telling this story, this invisible connection. Just at so I was at Oxford on Monday, and you know, a pretty formal group of high-level faculty who have known each other, by the way, and done research together for years. We did this question, we did a dinner and asked the question of talk about the aha moment when you realized your work really mattered to you. And the stories and the connections and the things they didn't even know about each other. Some of them had worked together for 30 years. Felt this sense of community in a new way. The second piece is then you offer up a challenge for people to work on. So say your challenge is scale. You're then, you know, you've connected, you've broken down these barriers. By the way, this is another way to get the fundraiser at the table where he or she is not the staff member, the fundraiser is a full participant and can really be able to do the follow-up in a different kind of way. But then you talk about a specific challenge that you're facing. And in the IRC case, we were talking about scale specifically. And so we said, many of you have experience with scale. What are the questions we need to be asking? How does it work? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What might we do? Where might we, go wrong? And a really robust conversation started happening around the particular problem that we were looking to solve. Now, this is where my co-author and I differ a little bit. I am a woman of action. I believe that nobody should ever leave an event, ever, saying, well, that was nice. I'm inspired, that was great, but I have no idea what they want from me. And so I and the Jeffersonian Dinners, and they're lightly moderated, by the way, so you don't have one person go on and on. But I end the Jeffersonian Dinners by inviting people to go around the room and suggesting 1 or 2 ways in which they might want to get involved. And I always let people off the hook by saying, even if it's just I want to know more. But what it does is it gives people the opportunity to give voice in their own voice about things that they're curious about. I'd like to come and visit your site. I'd like to know more. I'd like to potentially meet with so-and-so. I'd like you to come meet with the head of my corporation, whatever. Very real, tangible results come out of it. It's a much easier ask than when you're doing one-on-one meetings, I think, because it's a group of people who are offering up. And I also do believe when any 10 to 12 people come together and make up their minds to get something done, mountains can be moved. We all know this, right? 10 people saying, we're gonna get this done, we're gonna do this. Mountains can get moved. And so there's this sense of solidarity that's getting built that's very different from the kind of herd mentality that happens at standing cocktail parties or at a big special, gala event. At standing cocktail parties, it's chit chat, it's nice, you get pitched, you get the PowerPoint presentation, you're like, that was nice, that was inspiring, but I'm not sure what they want from me. And so in a Jeffersonian dinner, it's this really powerful way of people being able to speak with their own voice, and because it's small enough, you can actually follow up with all 12 people. We just did one in South Africa, actually. It was really interesting. It was with well-known philanthropists. We were doing it, we were raising money for the Global Fund. And we even had the King of the Zulus there. It was a powerful group of people. And they said, it's not going to work in Africa. We can't, it's too American, too touchy-feely. You can't do a Jeffersonian dinner here. And I said, let's just try it. Instead of, and we had a lot of very, very, very high net worth people and VIP people there. And I said, let's just try it. Take a risk. Just try it. And everybody was sort of skeptical, but we sat around the table. And the question we asked was, talk about how HIV has personally affected your life. And it was magical. It was magical. People were literally brought to tears. And it created this sense of, then why does the Global Fund matter? People think it's irrelevant, but why does it matter? And what can you do? And as an outcome, by the way, from that dinner, a $50 million gift was pledged at Davos for the Global Fund. And so it really, these dinners have this magic sort, and they're so easy. So I just encourage you, I really encourage you to do them. And I'm happy to take questions about them because I know it's can be an interesting topic.
Do you share a thematic before the dinner or not? It's a surprise.
We do. I try to share the question. So part of it's just like, can I get my act together enough in time to get the bios out and everything? Ideally, you do share the question in advance because otherwise people are sitting at the dinner kind of half listening, saying, what's my answer, what's my answer? If I don't get my act together and share the question in advance, I usually don't go around the room. I try to throw it around the room so people aren't, because it's hard to listen generously when you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, what am I going to say for my answer?
So I don't understand, what would be an invitation like? Here's the bio of the people
Yep.
invited to dinner. Here's some of the things we'll talk about. You're not mentioning your organization at all.
You do. Yeah, absolutely.
So
You talk about your. There is on our website, by the way, thegenerositynetwork.com, sample invitations. Good sample invitations where we're saying we're bringing together a group of.
Can you repeat that?
Thegenerositynetwork.com. We have a whole format on there of step by step how you do a Jeffersonian dinner. There's sample invitations, all kinds of things. But I did neglect to say that, so the moderator will open and basically say, this is a whole table conversation. I'm going to lightly moderate this if you go on too long. But I will always give the organization, the head of the organization, 5 minutes to share what the goals are and some of the updates.
At what stage again?
Right at the beginning. Right at the beginning.
And then you open the questions.
Then you're breaking down these barriers. And then you're going to start talking about the real challenge at hand. One of the challenges.
What do you tell them is the purpose of the meeting?
So the purpose of the meeting, we said we're gathering a group of philanthropists. So we did one for Peter Gabriel's charity recently with Witness, and we said we're bringing together a group of filmmakers and philanthropists and people who care about human rights to come together and talk about how do we use media and video to change the course, the trajectory of human rights issues. It was very specific. And so, but I think, again, a lot of it is like anything. It's incumbent upon the host to also think about people. It's not just, though, for new prospective partners. It's a really powerful vehicle for your teams to do it, for your boards to do it, because then you're remembering, again, why am I doing this? Why does this matter? Somebody else had a question?
It relates maybe to the point you just made, but I suppose I was wondering, particularly the example you gave, how comfortable or familiar with each other do people need to be for you to, even with advance warning, to have that kind of conversation?
I've been to them where nobody knows anybody. Nobody knows anybody. And it's risky. It takes some vulnerability. But that's why you start with somebody who's either done it before or the host or somebody who's setting the stage. Now what you don't want to do, and I don't want to get too deep into this, again, there's lots of resources on this site. What you don't want to do is have people share ideas. So I was helping to launch, there's a great nonprofit called IDEO.org. I don't know if folks know IDEO.org. And so we were going to do at the last couple TED conferences ago when we were launching it, we were doing a Jeffersonian dinner and we were bringing a bunch of people together. And the CEO said, I want to talk about a design idea that's made a difference in people's lives. And I said, it's not going to work. Tim, it is not going to work. You've got to get people to tell a story. And he's like, no, I just want to do it because we're about designs. And literally, we got this great group together. And, the first person said the iPad. And then the next person, said the telephone. I don't know. It was ideas. It wasn't connecting people in any real way. You weren't learning anything about each other in a real way. So you can't ask ideas. You need to ask people to share their own narrative. And it really does kind of follow one of my great heroes and colleagues, and actually teaches in my Harvard course, is a guy called Marshall Gans. Marshall, if you don't know his work, you should. He's one of the great community organizers. He worked with Dr. King to organize the Montgomery bus boycott, and then for 16 years worked with Chavez on the farm workers revolution. And he's created, and it's actually also, he generously contributed a chapter in our book. And the arc of it, which really follows what Jeffersonian Dinner is the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. And the story of self is what happens at the beginning of the dinner. You're telling your own story of why am I called to do this work, or why does this matter to me, or here's why, since I was a little kid, I've always been interested in justice, and here's why, because I was bullied, whatever the story is. The story of us then is that question. How do we start as a community, start thinking about solutions and answers? And then the last piece is the story of now, the action piece. What are we going to do? How are we going to leave this room and potentially start to make a difference together? Follow-up, like anything, is really critical, so you can have the best Jeffersonian dinner in the world, and if people aren't actually following up on it, I think that's a problem. So that's why I like to keep them small, too. So I just encourage you to give them a try. They really work.
I need to wait for Michael. Shall I shout?
Shout.
I think that question that you offered, talk about a time when someone's entered your life and changed your trajectory, is brilliant, and it would be really, really suitable for my organisation. Have you got any other quick questions that you could offer up at these dinners? Generic, just to kind of get people going.
Yeah, a lot of it is dependent on the organization. It really is dependent. What you're trying to do is evoke values from people. So it's questions where you're thinking about human connection and values. And so
we're a microfinance organisation that lend money to the world's poorest entrepreneurs. So that's why that is such a perfect. So we would lend money to someone.
Try it. Use that question. I do think we have a whole bunch of questions on the website. I'm just having a little bit of a moment here. What did you do, Terry, when you did one?
I haven't done one.
I thought you did one.
No, but I'd love to do one.
Okay.
Oh, hello. Hi. Yes. You're all invited
By the
to
way,
dinner.
I'm committing to doing a Jeffersonian dinner for all
Let's
of you.
figure out the questions here and have a dinner.
I thought we did one for you.
No, but
Okay.
we should do one.
Yeah. We had another question here?
I think it's great advice, and when you said, this space for a one-table conversation, I can think of literally the best professional dinner that I've been to that I hosted several years ago was that. I mean, it was incredible. It was actually about 16 or 20 people, but because we had great acoustics and a great group of people, it was just, amazing. So I think it's great advice. I'm just kind of coming back to, though, this question around moving out of client into partner, and you're, absolutely spot on. I think about the relationships I've had with certain funders that are true collaborators, partners. They give us the space in the room, and it's kind of like I don't want to have to go to anybody else because they're magic partners. But in my experience, not every funder is that way. Yeah. So it's kind of like, I guess if you could give us some pragmatic advice how to move the late adopters in this idea of partnership that are looking for, and also I need to be held accountable. I need to think about what are milestones, what are metrics of success. If I'm taking your money, how do we know we've succeeded rather than we had a wonderful experience working together? So.
Of course, and that's why you need strategy, and that's where you need outcomes and measures. And by the way, if you're not doing that, I guarantee you're gonna get into the gift that keeps on costing, which we've all had that scenario where someone's like, I'll give you $1 million if you just go over here. And that's hugely problematic, which is why you need your strategy in place. So really what I've seen on this philanthropic journey is, and it really equates to the kind of Brave New World exercise we did, the basic needs, the social piece, and then the growth piece. Where I see a lot of philanthropists start is in this very social space, of I've made a certain amount of money, I'm of a certain stature in my community, I'm going to start to give back, I'm going to start going to galas, put my name on a letterhead, all of those things, which is great. It's a great entry point. It's a great place to start. But then I see philanthropists who say, and not always, again, there isn't a hard and fast rule, but I think who we want as partners are not necessarily people who are just trying to figure out where they belong in the world by what organizations they're associated with. I think what we're looking for is how do we then work with them to say there are real problems in the world that we can solve. And that's where impact starts coming in. And we start to say, as a philanthropist, I don't just understand my place in the world by where I give, but by how I'm giving, how my contributions are making an impact and a difference. And again, how am I collaborating to create real change? Now, I do have to say the most sophisticated philanthropists I work with they move past even just the impact phase, because they do see that all of this work is so deeply integrated. And they do see that these world's problems and challenges are never going to be completely solved. I mean, if I wake up tomorrow and it's utopia and every problem on the planet's solved, I'll have egg on my face for this theory, but it's not going to happen, because we're dualistic human beings, and there's always going to be more work to be done. And so, the philanthropists that I see, they absolutely are working on very specific problems. Malaria, eradication of, mother-to-child transmission, but they also see how deeply interconnected it is to all this other work, and they're creating collaborations that allows for that to be not a siloed thing, but an interconnected thing. And so those are the philanthropists that I see whose theory of change, whose worldview is about co-creation. And we're co-creating a different kind of a future than just problem solving. And so I think it's how do we working with our partners to help them move along that journey in a way that really creates change, sustainable change. And then people are inspired, I think, to stay with you, to go deeper. They may, again, move on to something else. It's fine. That's the jazz bands moving in and out. But there's also, I think, an ability then to really allow. It's the same thing I've been saying. It allows people to iterate in a different way, to be learners, to adapt, to grow, not knowers.
Two questions. First of all,
Can we get the mic? I'm sorry, you just have a nice, gentle, soft voice.
Two questions. You're speaking about philanthropists as individuals, but a lot of money comes from corporates.
Yeah.
So our organization is sponsored by corporates.
Mm-hmm.
So what you tend to do is build up a relationship and align to the corporate, and often then the person in charge of CSR changes or something else, and you're back at square one. So question is, how would you deal personally then with corporates? Second of all, are all these people at the dinner people that you know, and how do you get them to commit?
Yeah.
Because most of them
commit
are
to
really
action, or just commit to
no,
showing
just
up to the
coming
dinner?
for the dinner.
Yeah.
Just showing up. Because a lot of them say that they will come,
Yeah.
and then they're last minute, they're too busy. They're all busy people.
Yeah.
So what is the hook that you use?
So on the corporate side, first of all, I think CSR is really changing. That I think corporations are moving away from CER, and it's a very different conversation than it's over here separate from our mission versus really starting to be integrated into our mission. And by the way, I think fundraising's the same way. Often people will start. I encourage anybody who's doing like new startup, social enterprises or nonprofits, not to disaggregate fundraising from your mission. The most successful, the fastest growing nonprofit in the United States is DonorsChoose.org. I don't know if you know it, and it's growing fast because they integrated, even though it's about teacher classroom projects for teachers, they integrated citizen philanthropy right into the mission of the organization, just like Kiva did. Just like churches and synagogues have done and mosques from the beginning of time. Giving is not, here's our mission and giving's over here. It's part of this building of a community. Corporations, well, first of all, just statistically, this is absolutely true in the US, but I would venture to say it's growing more consistent internationally, is that 90 cents of every dollar comes from living individuals. And so the vast majority of money transfer is coming from people, not corporations. That said, again, I think you need to deal with corporations, human being to human being, and I'm working on this project right now, which I won't get too deep into on this HIV, and we're working with the fashion industry. We've got a lot of corporate sponsors, and I start every single meeting not with, where's your brand gonna go, how are you gonna sponsor, but We are changing lives. We're saving lives. This is the beginning of the end of AIDS. This is something you're going to tell your grandkids that you worked on. And we're inspiring these corporate leaders to spend the extra time and care about an issue bigger than just, oh, this is a marketing thing. Now, in terms of getting people to the dinner, you got to hold people accountable. You just have to, get a group of people who say, I'm going to show up. And because it's a small group and they know it's a small group, I think they're more, I can't think of many times where we've had a lot of people cancel on a dinner. So again, it's who's inviting and who's the right people. By the way, we have 5 more minutes, but I'm happy to keep taking questions.
After your Jeffersonian dinner, I'm thinking 10 years on, and you coming and seeing those people again, but having talked to them throughout those 10 years, what I'd like to hear about from you is how you get people on that philanthropic journey. What are the barriers as you go through those 10 years? Because, and what is it that stops people and not getting to the 10-year mark, and what is it that gets people over the barriers?
Yeah, well, for one thing, we can't treat them as giant walking checkbooks. I have yet to meet a philanthropist who wants to be seen as a giant walking checkbook. So I think it's, again, now sometimes people are gonna go away. There's gonna be a spectrum. You're gonna have people who are much more involved. The projects that I work on where we have big fundraising goals and quick, and I am not exaggerating, and these are busy people. I talk to them every day, sometimes many times a day. Yesterday, because we're working on this HIV project, I talked to the top 5 people I've been working with, I don't know, 15 times yesterday, because we are really a team, and they do not see this as my job. They see this as our job. I may be helping to conduct this a little bit, but this is our job. So they're making calls, they're going in the field, they're going to Washington, D.C. to advocate. They are full-on partners. But it's a spectrum, You can't have 200 people who you work at that level with. So I think a lot of it is, how are you continuing to engage people? And also, if they move past, that's fine. Again, go find your next passion. That's awesome. I think somebody up here has been, I'm very patiently waiting with the mic, so I'm going to jump up there.
The mic's starting to get a little heavy. There it is. Just a quick question, actually. What about the Jeffersonian picnic or field trip? Is that advisable or not?
We did in Africa a Jeffersonian bus ride because we didn't have enough time to actually do a dinner, and we were going from site to site, and we had people on the bus with the microphone. Absolutely. I also think getting it out of the parlor and getting it into the field is really cool too. Now, I'm a big believer when you do site visits that people need to really go through a site visit not as a movie critic. And I say this to people. Obviously, this is still a work in progress, or we wouldn't be still raising money for it, resources for it. So when you go through this experience, when I'm taking you to this village in Ghana or this school or whatever we're doing, go through it with partnership eyes. We may not implement every idea you have, but go through as if we're already partners so we can think strategically at the end, how might that, the ideas that are generating. And people are going through the experience in a very different way than if they're going through saying, well, I'm also working over here and they do that so much better than you do it. And so it's a whole different experience. So unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions because we're there's a session right after this, so I promised we'd end on time. I just want to end with, I think this work has a lot of, it's easy to get burned out. It's easy to get frustrated, tired, exhausted. There's a great TED Talk that maybe some of you saw last year from Brian Stevenson. Did anybody see this fantastic TED Talk? If you haven't, I really encourage you to. Brian Stevenson is his name. He's a civil rights lawyer, and he works a lot on getting people off death row. And he was first of all, it was the absolute most perfect modeled story of Self, Us, and Now. People spontaneously came up and gave him 7-figure gifts. But he was telling the story of, he was friends with Rosa Parks. And he was sitting there one day just completely burned out, doing the kind of work we do every day that's really exhausting. And he said, Rosa Parks said to him, Brian, this is such hard work. You must be tired. And he said, I am, Rosa. I am so tired. And she said, then you have to have courage. And I just thought, boy, that is something that we forget. And that this work, somebody said it upstairs, but I would just reiterate it, that this work really is a challenge of the head and the hands and the heart, the head being the strategy, the hands being our resources and our skill, and the heart being the courage. So with that, thank you. I'll hang out. I know there's another session, but I'll hang out if people have questions. And there's lots of ways to reach me through my website, through Harvard, through LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out.